Hello, Willy and Chris. It's good to see you. We've talked on the radio, and that was fun. So it's great to have you here. For those of you who have just joined us, welcome to Sisters in Crime, Orange County. If you're from somewhere else, put it in the chat. We want to know where everybody is from. And I'll introduce our authors and then we have a conversation. We'll talk. So Willy Vlautin was born in Reno, Nevada, and is the author of 6 novels and the founder of the bands Richmond Vlautin and the Declines. No, wait, sorry, the Delines. Delines?
Yeah, you did good.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Willy started writing stories and songs at the age of 11 after receiving his first guitar. He was a finalist for the Penn Faulkner Award and was shortlisted for the International Dublin Literary Award. 2 of his novels, The Motel Life and Lean on Pete, have been adapted as films. His novels have been translated into 11 languages. His most recent novel is The Night Always Comes, published by HarperCollins. And I have it somewhere. I want to show you. Right here it is. Lovely cover. Chris Offutt is the author of the short story collections Kentucky Straight and Out of the Woods, the novel The Good Brother, and 3 memoirs, The Same River Twice, No Heroes, and My Father the Pornographer. His work has appeared in Best American Short Stories and Best American Essays, among other places. He's written screenplays for Weeds, True Blood, and Treme. Is that how you pronounce it, Treme? And has received fellowships from the Lannan and Guggenheim Foundations. His most recent novel is The Killing Hills, published by Grove Atlantic. And here this one is. I love it. Love these covers. Why don't we start off? Well, first of all, thank you for being here. And let's start off with each of you taking a few minutes to talk about your most recent book. Do you want to start, Willy?
Yeah, sure. The Night Always Comes, it started just by driving around downtown Portland. Maybe, 5, 6 years ago, I started realizing there was, anywhere from 10 to 15 cranes at any given time. And cranes meaning new buildings being put up, new high-rise buildings being put up. And what I realized is that within 15 years, the housing prices had nearly quadrupled in Portland, and all of a sudden it's a boom town. And I live 30 miles north of Portland, but I have an office in this part of Portland called St. John's. And just looking out my office, right now there's 6 apartment buildings that have gone up in the last 6 years. Yet there's an explosion of homelessness and like permanent, semi-permanent tent encampments. And so it just started waking me up in the middle of the night. That idea of, well, how could you afford to buy a house in this town when, I bought a place here when I was a house painter, and it was an affordable city for just a normal person to be able to buy a beat up house that's meant for a guy like that's a house painter or works a regular kind of blue collar-ish job. And all of a sudden, those houses were $400,000 near a freeway and practically tear downs. And so that's how it started. I just started waking up in the middle of the night and thinking about it. And I said to myself, well, if you just pick somebody, say you're in the grocery store and you just pick one person and you say, how are they going to handle that? And so that's what I did. I picked a dysfunctional family, a mother and a 30-year-old daughter and a 32-year-old developmentally disabled brother. They're this unit, and they've kind of stuck together for the sake of the brother. And the mother and the daughter don't really get along, and they have an opportunity to buy their rental property that they've lived in their whole lives. The daughter, her whole life. So for 30 years they've been in this place, and the landlord wants them to have it. He's going to cut them a deal, but the argument, I guess, is the mom says it's ridiculous to pay that kind of money to live in such a fallen down house near a freeway, and the daughter says this is our last chance of the American dream in a town like Portland. So I was interested in that idea of the American dream and home ownership. And bigger themes, I was interested in greed. You know, I got stuck on that Trump quote, which is the point is you can't be too greedy. And he was speaking in terms of business, I know, but I feel like if the people at top say greed is good, then how does greed look at the bottom? And so throughout, you know, basically one night, Lynette, the daughter, has to try to get enough money to get a down payment or to get enough money to get the house because her mom backs out because her mom doesn't believe in it. You know, she has to go and meet all the different kinds of greed, all from the old money to the new money to the swindlers and the boomtown kind of contractors. It was so on a bigger theme. It was about greed as well. Jesus, I'm not very articulate today, and I apologize because I mean it is a Sunday, and I've been living like a pure life today. But that's pretty much where my book's at. You know, a little bit.
How much of that did you know going in? You know, I mean, did all these pieces kind of come to you as you were writing, or what did you like? What was the seed of it all? What did you have at the very start?
I mean, over say a cup of coffee, I knew I always kind of know the start, the middle, and the end. Like over a cup of coffee, I could tell you. I don't know a lot of like, and I know the soul of it. Like I always, if I know the soul of what I'm working on, like the heart of it, like it's like when you hear a beautiful song. If it makes you feel a certain way, like if the song ends and you feel a certain way, I always want a book of mine to feel like a certain way. So once I had those things figured out, I knew what I wanted to do. I made a mistake because my wife's a baker, or she was a baker in Portland, and so I wrote a whole section of the book about a bakery for her, and that was a year you know that I blew up because it didn't work, and I was just writing it as a gift, and it fell apart. But if I don't get sidetracked on those kind of bad decisions that I always make in every novel, I kind of had this one figured out before I went in, at least the big things.
Mm, great, thank you. How about you, Chris? How about the Killing Hills?
What was the question again?
What was the question? Talk about how the book came about.
Well, I'd always wanted to write a crime novel, and I thought that most of my works fit the category of crime. Ex-cons, bootleggers, marijuana growers, homicide sheriffs, but they were never seen that way. They were not. So I thought, well, maybe I should just put a dead body at the beginning, and then that will give a big signal that this, in fact, is a crime novel. And so that's what I did. And then I realized that most crime narratives, whether it's novels or movies or TV, they have an urban setting, and people essentially go from one person to another. They talk to the person, they get some clues, they figure this out. So I had to do the same thing, except in a very isolated rural environment. So I wound up just having Mick, the protagonist, spend a lot of time driving around in his pickup truck between point A to point B to get there, and having little mini adventures along the way. I mean, that's pretty much, he spent most of the time in my mind in the truck, and then he would get somewhere. But in the final version, he gets her quicker than than I thought.
So you said this is the first novel of yours that's actually considered a crime novel.
Well, I don't know what it's considered. I'm saying that I just thought I would make a more overt attempt at it. And that overt attempt was having an army an experienced homicide investigator from the Army CID back home in Kentucky. The Army is one of the routes out of the hills. There's really only about four: prison, the graveyard, the Army, being a preacher, or law enforcement. That's it. I mean, I was one of the few who went to went to college, for example. So that kind of suited it. And, then I thought he would have this status of having been from there, but then the experience of having left for significant amounts of time gave him a dual status of he understands the hills and the culture, but he's also has a little bit of objectivity about it. And his sister is the sheriff. And she stumbled into it. Like, she was made a deputy for, because the politicians thought a female would be good in that role, and especially for domestic disputes. And then the sheriff died. So boom, she's a sheriff, and the powers that be don't want her to be successful purely because she's a woman. That was all I had to get started on. I didn't wake up in the middle of the night and look out the window at skyscrapers. There ain't no skyscrapers where I live.
And didn't you told me a while back that the hurricane or tornado came through your house and took the roof off? Is that the house where you're sitting?
Yeah, we're back in it. I mean, I was out of this house for five months. Yeah. Yeah, that was a rough time.
And where you live?
I live in Lafayette County, Mississippi, near Oxford.
Interesting. So I'm looking at the back of the book, and it's also called Rural Noir. Do you think of The Killing Hills as rural noir?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I really don't. I don't know what that distinction really means. I mean, I think that, however they market it, if it helps, great. But I have never really tried to consider anything I ever wrote like into a category. They're just the books I happen to write at the time.
That's something I wanted to talk to both of you about.
Okay.
Because, categories are such a big deal anymore. I mean, in the query letter, agents want to know in the first paragraph, what category, how do you categorize your novels? And it sounds like, Chris, you write the story you have to write and worry about the categories later, or let somebody else worry about it.
I mean, categories is marketing, and these categories, they came out of libraries. That's where we started with this. And so, for example, mystery is a gigantic umbrella under which there are many, many, many subgenres, and then subgenres, where you have mysteries being solved by animals as a subgenre, right? Sub. So, and then bookstores follow suit in a way. And then I don't really know about how they're important or not. When I go to a bookstore or library, I don't browse by category. I just look for good writers, and if I find something that interests me, right now I'm reading a great novel by Peter Straub, who it's called Ghost Story from 1979 or 78, something like that. He's a fantastic writer. It's not really a ghost story, despite the title. The first 200 pages is about life in a small town, and he's such a good writer that I'll just follow him anywhere. I don't care if they call it a horror novel or not.
Right. What about you, Willy? Are you thinking categories when you write your novels? I mean, I was reading, when I was reading The Night Always Comes, I didn't know what to expect, and I considered it a literary novel, and then here comes a crime. And so how are you thinking about your work when you're writing?
I'm the same. I never think about those things. Maybe I should. I never think about that. I just want to write something that I think's cool. That I believe in. I grew up on well, like, my two guys that kind of made me want to write were Larry Brown at Oxford, Mississippi, and I grew up kind of like Raymond Carver's life. So I really identified with those stories. But then, when I was in my early 20s, I read Fat City by Leonard Gardner, and that really
Great book.
killed me. That killed me. And then I walked into a bookstore one day, and they had a cutout of a cowboy, and a black and white cowboy, and in his chest were all these Black Lizard books, and
Yeah.
it was David Goodis, Charles Willeford, Jim Thompson, and I didn't know who those guys were, but I liked that they were short, and there was always like either like something cool happening, like either a really good looking woman or like a guy strangling somebody or a guy about ready to get shot or shoot somebody. And so I bought four of them, and I realized that and I was at that time I was just working a warehouse, and but I'd stay up half the night reading them, and I said to myself, man, I want to write stories that keep you up that much, that are that psychologically beat up, because I felt I was always pretty psychologically beat up, but I didn't want the crime. I was like, I want to write crime books without the crime. So I always felt my books were like that. I wanted to have that kind of urgency um, that those books have, and the kind of realism that those books have, and the psychologically kind of dented people, which I feel most comfortable around. But with this one, but with this one, it does have more. It has more of the crime aspect of it. I think just because I was so interested in the idea that the only way to make money if you're a working class person is it's either you either do something illegal, or you use your body to do something illegal. It's all about trying to get by, and you can't do that by working 24 hours a day. So in that regard, I kind of dove in with the more crime, just because it kind of needed it with this book, I thought.
Hmm, interesting. So
Oh, and
you,
I forgot to mention, I remember when I bought Chris Offutt's your first book of short stories, Kentucky Straight. I was in Powell's. I was on vacation. I wasn't living in Portland at the time. I was living in Reno, and I took a vacation, and I bought that book. So I remember taking a vacation and buying your book, and I remember because there weren't a lot of writers like that, telling kind of more working class, smaller town stories that had an edge to them. So it's nice to meet you. I'd never met you before, so I'm excited.
I mean, part of the reason I wrote that book and I've stuck with writing about these people is just exactly what you said. When I was a young writer, I looked around, there was anything said where I grew up, nothing. The most recent had been a guy who said stuff in the 50s and then another guy in the 30s. And the hills of Eastern Kentucky had changed drastically uh, due to the Vietnam War, the war on poverty, didn't really work out the way they'd hoped, and the interstate. So it was just a real different world. And I thought, well, I'll just try to write. I'll try to give the young writers of the future some books to that I didn't have, so to speak.
I mean, I was the same
Sounds
way about.
grandiose, but it's true. What?
I was the same way about Nevada. There was Walter Van Tilburg Clark,
Yeah,
and then
good writer.
and Robert Laxall, the really cool Basque writer, and those were my two heroes. And there was a mural of Clark in downtown Reno, and I used to go down there, and I was just like amazed that there was a real writer from Nevada. But I was always mad. I was like, why can't they write one about like the grittier side of Reno? Because that's what I liked, and so in a way, I did my same thing. As I wanted to write about this certain side of Nevada because I loved it so much, and I wanted other people to be in love with that kind of world.
interesting. So Chris, you write short stories, memoir, novels. Um, do do the ideas come with the context? I mean, it's sort of like we have the content and then we need to put it into a context. And do you know what you want to work on before you start writing? Like you're done with a project and now it's time for something else. Does it all come to you at once, the content and the context, what it's going to be?
No.
Okay.
No, I mean, I wrote a lot of short stories initially because I wasn't real confident as a writer. And, you know, it's a lot less risky. You know, I could write 15 or 18-page short story, and if it failed, which many of them did, it's not too much time, a week, 2 weeks. And also there were ways to run formal experiments so I could learn more about writing, point of view, tense, you know, flashbacks, time, all that stuff. And at a certain point, I felt as if I had learned all that I was able to from it, and I just needed to be more expansive. With memoir, it's very different, of course, because, you know, the subject matter always comes first. You know, always. Oh, somebody's getting beat up. The subject matter always comes first, and you know, so then the key is picking out. LeBron James. That's not.
Jordan.
It's Fernando Lara for the basketball.
Barbara, can you mute?
I did. I am, and they keep. I'm trying to remove. I'm removing. Okay, sorry.
Oh, it was entertaining.
That never happened before.
Okay, sorry about that.
No problem.
So you were saying?
Oh yeah, well, with memoir, you know, the key is to pick. You already know the story ahead of time, so that takes the pressure off invention, and then there's a little more, which then allows structure and language can get in there. But the big key is to choose the most interesting part of a life that merits writing about. You know, most of my life has not been worth writing about. You know, it's the past 35 years been sitting in a room. That's not really that juicy a material. So, but I prefer novels. I read novels. I don't read memoir. I read a lot of short stories when I was writing them, but now I just mainly stick with novels. And I love the short novels, like what Willy was saying, those Black Lizard novels, which was started by Barry Gifford, the reprint house. Now there's been a few other of these. Now what? I got some Spotify now.
Soy guapo, lo sé, las mujeres se calientan, ya lo sé. Llegué yo y jodí su madre antes que a su novio.
It is a Zumba, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
I think he's gone.
I think he's gone.
Yeah, we removed him. I believe he's gone.
Hey, Chris.
Yeah.
Right here, I don't know if you can see that. That's a picture of Barry Gifford on a horse.
Oh yeah. Yeah, Barry's a real interesting guy.
Yeah, man, he's become a really cool, good friend of mine over the years. You know, he was another one of those guys that you couldn't really pigeonhole what he did.
No.
But he was really inspiring to me. You know, he was one of those guys. In the same week, I discovered Barry Gifford and Larry Brown at the library in Reno, man, and it was, you know, it changed the direction of my life, sadly, you know, or maybe for the good, I don't know.
He's a good guy, he's a smart guy, real smart guy.
Yeah, man, real smart, funny.
So, Willy, did you start with short stories?
You know, I just started, I wrote songs all the time, and I was in, bad bands most of my life, and what I did is I just like I was in love with disappearing, and so I was in love with movies that make you disappear. I loved records that were set in different places, so I could disappear into them. And I loved novels that I felt like I was disappearing in, like you would say a Larry Brown book that was relatable to me. But I could disappear, and so I just sat down one day and started writing a novel, because I figured it was a cheap way to like disappear from your own life, where you could live the way you wanted to live. And at the time I was 19, and I always wanted, like an uncle of mine, to own a wrecking yard. And my dream in life, and it still kind of is to live on a wrecking yard with like your uncle, and all you do is pick parts once in a while, and you barbecue, and your uncle loves you, so you have like a father kind of figure, which I always thought would have been nice. And so I like was 50 pages in, and we were just like barbecuing. We had matching trailers on the lot. All right.
I wonder why they're targeting us.
I wish they'd pick cooler songs though.
Yeah, no kidding. This isn't all that interesting. I mean, you're gonna go through all this work to do this? Okay.
I live on an acreage. If you want to just, I don't know if I'm old enough to be your uncle, but we could start a wrecking yard, man. I got a lot of junk.
Yeah, I do too, man. I mean, and the thing I noticed, was about page 50. All of a sudden, the uncle was having the nephew steal cars for him and do all this illegal stuff, and it brought up this like like all that stuff that's like when you're young and you haven't dealt with it, and you're like, well, why are my stories so dark, and why is everything so sad, and why would the person that's supposed to be cool to you why aren't they nice to you? And so really I started writing because of that. It opened up a huge like kind of hornet's nest inside my head and in my heart, and I liked that, and I loved the grunt work of it. Like the grunt work of being in a band is trying to get gigs and keep the band happy, and you're loud, and you're making everybody unhappy that lives around you. No one likes you playing the same songs over and over. And then with writing, you're just by yourself, and you're just building stuff that you don't bother anybody. And I think at like 17, 18, 19, that really, it was like my favorite thing in the world to do. And to fail in private is a genius thing. When you fail in a band, like people just don't like you, and it's awful. But like when you fail as a writer, none of your friends would even read it anyway. So you fail in private, which I adore.
Do actual people ever serve as inspiration for characters? Do you ever put together a few people and create a composite character, or are you trying not to do that? Do you hope not to do that?
I mean, I always do, yeah. I think every character I've ever written is probably, it was like a pie chart, be 1/3 of somebody I know, 1/3 invention, and 1/3 me, and the third me is always the sort of the emotional side, or whatever, observational side. If they make observations, they're my own. And it doesn't matter whether it's age or ethnicity or gender. I think people can still feel the same and have the same thoughts and observations about the world around. So yeah, sure. It's a hard job. I mean, writing, it's really difficult, which is probably why I do it. It's very challenging, and it makes time pass fast, which I like. But I also always look for ways to simplify the process. And, if I have a character who's based on somebody else, then I can rely on that person more than my own imagination and take shortcuts and make up stereotypes or tropes.
I mean, I could have just said that, you know, he said it, he said it much better than I could ever say it, but I basically am the same. The only thing I've never done is I've tried really hard not to throw anybody under the bus.
Oh yeah.
That I'm close to, or write about my family in a way that they wouldn't want. Because the way I look at it is, you can say what you want to say. Like if you want to beat up your mom, say, in a story, you can make her as a 70-year-old truck driver, you know, and say the exact same stuff you want to say. So, but I'm basically the same. I always try to stay emotionally, have the guts of emotion partially in every character, just so I can get behind it and I'm interested in it.
I also write about people I love. You know, if I don't love somebody, even the people who are perhaps less savory than others, if I can't find redeeming qualities, something I can love about them, then I don't really want to spend a lot of time with them. You know, and that's essentially what writing is. I write about people, which means then I have, you know, daily interactions, imaginary interactions with them. And by golly, they better be interesting and, you know, have their good sides.
Well, write about antagonists or villains. I mean, I like to call them antagonists because not every antagonist is actually a villain, right?
I mean, it's just, for me, it's the same. I mean, I don't like these. I'm not a big fan of the kind of writing where there's this concrete antagonist who's really, really super bad. And, you know, at the end, he's either going to get caught, killed, or get away, you know. But you look at something like the book Silence of the Lambs, Hannibal Lecter. He's charming. He's very smart. He's very articulate. He's a really interesting character, despite his diet, you know, and despite the fact that his parents, when he was born, said, let's name him Hannibal in case he turns out later to, you know, be a cannibal. It'll be so cool. It'll be really cool. That's absurd. But I'm not interested in writing about these sort of antagonists that are just, that's all they're there for, because they're not that interesting. I don't even know if this book has an antagonist, you know. I mean, there is somebody, it's a killer, but, you know, it was accidental. Oops, I probably shouldn't give it away.
I mean, the way I look at it, some of the most abusive people I've met in my life are also some of the most charming.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And that's what makes it so. That's what makes life so hard. And when people beat up on you, it's you wish that a person would come to you and just hit you in the face and give you a black eye, and then you go, see, that's what they do. But when it's underneath, when they do it verbally or psychologically, it gets way more confusing and heartbreaking. And so I've always written, I just call them like more questionable, rougher characters that way. You know, I try to make them as real as I can and heartbreaking in that way.
A question came in from Maddie. Do you think about whether your characters are relatable to huge numbers of readers or a demographic, or write them as they are in your head and what happens?
Willy?
You know, I never think I should think about stuff like that. You know, I never think about that. I just write stories that I think are cool. You know, it's like, I remember reading, say, Fat City was one by Leonard Gardner, and I just wanted to live in that world. It just felt really good to me. I didn't know if it was a good book or a famous book or how many people read it. It was like a drug. I felt really at home in that world, and it meant a lot to me. And so I've just always wanted to write stories like that. Maybe I should think about audiences and stuff like that, you know, because, you know, you write for 2 fucking years on a book and then you finish it and you're like, I wonder if anyone had even liked this idea. And you're like, well, maybe you should have thought of that before you spent 2 years writing it. So I don't think about it at all. I should, but
I love Fat City. That's his only book, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
He was married to a great short story writer, Gina. I forgot her last name. Anyhow, but I don't think about anything like that. That's I don't even know many writers who do. I think that writers who do think that way are probably coming out of a different world than I came out of, or um, maybe there's pressure from an editor or an agent to think about the audience. But I just associate that with magazine writing or a real particular, I know some romance novelists, and they just have formulas that they have to adhere to. And if they don't adhere to them, really strict ones, then the editors get mad and they won't get in print. So, but idea of relatable, if I can write about a person who's real to me and vulnerable and generous and kind and makes mistakes, my thinking is that's the way, everybody's like that. So, then anybody who reads it, who is vulnerable, kind of made mistakes, will, be able to maybe relate, as you said, relatable to that book or to the character. I hope. My thinking is the way the universal is through the personal. So my stuff is extremely personal, and the fiction, all the fiction is, it's very personal to me, and there's a lot of me in there. So if people can pick up on it and like it and take something away with it, it's because of that.
I think in general it's probably really tricky to chase stuff.
Yeah.
Like writing, and so worrying about stuff like that, I think I mean, some people can, and I've watched people do that musically. They'll kind of jump onto stuff and do really well at it, but I think you have to really love whatever you're chasing. You have to love. So if it's a fad you're chasing, if you're in love with the fad, then I think you have a shot. But if you're chasing it just because you're like, people are buying this, you just have to. I would guess you still have to drink the Kool-Aid of it, because fans know, they know someone who believes it versus someone who doesn't.
Yes, that's certainly true with novels. A novel, if it takes 2 or 3 years to write and another year to get out, whatever bandwagon you're trying to jump on, the odds are it's already moved on, and you're just look like some lame copycat who's comes late to the party. I think with poetry and perhaps music, you can be a little faster, on that, and respond to the world a little faster. But that's just me looking at poets and songwriters and thinking, oh wow, they got it better than I do. The grass is always greener.
Well, as you were talking, Chris, a few minutes ago, you reminded me of something that a writer I talked with, Michelle Hunnivan. I don't know if you're familiar with her, but I wrote down something she said that really stuck with me. And she said, what is most personal and shameful is often the most universal.
Okay, well, I don't have, I mean, I understand that's the same idea.
Well, I mean, I guess it kind of goes along with my next question, which is writing honestly. Like when you're writing memoir, when you talk to memoir writers, and you talk about writing honestly and authentically, it makes sense as a memoirist because, of course, memoir has to have happened, right? Fiction is fiction, but we also talk about writing authentically and honestly, writing to fiction writers. And that becomes more, I think, esoteric. Like, what does that mean to write, to write honestly, to be a writer who writes honestly, even when you're writing fiction? Do you have any response to that, either of you?
Go ahead, Willie. It's all yours.
I'll make a fool out of myself. I mean, I think emotionally, I think if and this probably sounds really off. But I always thought if you don't have talent, like I've never thought I had much talent at this stuff. I'm not, a gifted student of anything really. But I always thought if you wrote with blood, like your own blood, meaning so you do like when you get to a nervous situation in a story, that you tell what really would happen, or like when something bad happens to a character, you don't just kind of brush into it. You get into the soul of the bad thing. So in that way you're really honest, and in doing so, I always thought by writing that, like if you looked and you had a box, say all your demons and dents and scars and all that stuff. I always thought if you wrote about them, like you took one of them out and you wrote a story about it from all different angles, that you would take its power. It hasn't really worked for me that way, but that's what I've always tried to do, and in that way, I guess that's honest. I would call that honest. Like you're pushing, you're opening that dark closet of yourself, and then what you see in there, you admit it, and you can tell a story around it. And in doing so, you hope that it helps you, but also when somebody reads one of your stories, it's like that you feel is true, that they'll feel comfort from it, or not is alone. I mean, when you read a good novel, part of it is you don't feel as lonely. It's like having a pal in a way. And so I always wanted to do that in my own way.
Does that happen? Is that like a revision draft that happens? I mean, like when you're putting down your first draft, will you be thinking that way, or is that something later? Are you getting down sort of the structure of the novel for the first draft, and then you're layering it later and opening up these areas?
Yeah, for me, it's like I wrote this novel called "Don't Skip Out on Me" about this kid that decides he's going to change his race and become and it was in tribute to Fat City, because I was feeling really beat up. So I picked 3 saints to guide me through this book, and one of them was Fat City. So I had the guy be a boxer, and he changes his name. He says he's Mexican, but he's not, and he tries to act like a Mexican and be a Mexican boxer, because I love Mexican boxers, and so when I first did the first draft, it wasn't. It was just kind of, I touched on it, and I told the story, but then when in the subsequent drafts, you start realizing how broken a kid would have to be to do that. Mm-hmm. And then you're like, oh man, this is really heavy. I don't know if I have it in me to be this heavy. But then you're like, but you wrote it because it's this heavy. Like you can't reinvent yourself that way, and you have to be so broken to actually do it. And most people want to do that, but this kid actually does do it.
What were the other 2 saints?
James Welsh.
Oh yeah.
The Montana writer.
Winter in the Blood.
Yeah. The one for me was Death of Jim Loney.
That's a great book. Yeah, those are my 2 favorites.
Yeah, me too. And I love Death of Jim Loney. And the last one was Laxalt from Nevada.
The Nevada writer. Right.
Yeah. So it was those 3. But yeah, in the subsequent drafts, you have to start getting more real. Like if a guy kills another guy, or breaks up with his gal, or steals from his mother, or whatever it is, you have to get to the heart of really why they're doing it, and then it gets more painful and weird and depressing, and and that's when it gets good, or at least real.
Any thoughts, Chris?
I mean, I revise a lot. My writing process is like a page and a half a day, and then I page to 2 pages a day. Then I gotta figure out what to do the rest of the day, and then I can get a manuscript within a year, and then I spend quite a bit of time revising it. I usually cut about a third out of it because it just doesn't fit, and then look at it, see what it is, and try to strengthen the more interesting parts, and then go back and set things up that I need to. But like kind of what Willy was saying, there's always a cause and effect. If you do something it's gonna affect, even in anybody's life. You do something, it's gonna affect you later, emotionally, psychologically. If it doesn't, you're one of these, abusive, sociopathic narcissists that no one wants to hang around with in the first place. So I think it's just the first draft, and then all the revisions that follow just draw on almost two separate skill sets, really. The first draft, you just gotta be as subjective as possible. Put everything in, put the kitchen sink, then throw the kitchen sink in, fill it full of dishes, turn the taps on, let the water overflow on the floor, and then that metaphor collapses. And then the revision requires the opposite skill, which is as much objectivity as possible to see what's here and to realize, wow, I really love this 100-page section about the bakery, but it doesn't fit. It doesn't belong in there. It's not good, and it's a heartbreaking thing to have to cut out something that you put all this time in. But so I'm not sure what I forgot what the original question was.
I do.
That doesn't matter.
Writing honestly, I think was.
I mean, I'm not even sure what that means, or what a dishonest writer is. I don't think that way. To write honestly or write authentically, it sounds like it's either or. What's an inauthentic writing? I don't know. I just want to be as specific and precise as possible with every single word and every single punctuation mark. It's difficult with punctuation because I didn't really learn it correctly. So I just wing it. And my favorite punctuation mark is what they call the M dash, which is 2 hyphens, bang, bang, right next to each other. And I use them a lot. And the reason I love them is because there are absolutely no rules governing the use of the M dash. So that has saved my bacon. Willie, I recommend it. You don't have to worry about commas, man.
I mean, I think I always think crime is really interesting. I guess when you're talking, the way I look at fiction too is like the movie The Sting. It's all it's the long con, So you have to, like Chris says, you have to be precise, and that you have to get it as real and emotionally real as possible, so people buy into it, and you can get across what you want to say. But lately I've been reading. I'm obsessed with the Richard Stark's Parker series.
Yeah, I've read those. Yeah.
I mean, they're breathtaking. And that guy's, Parker's a sociopath. I mean,
oh yeah.
And you think
that's Donald Westlake.
Yeah. And it's just amazing to me that it's such a stylized voice and such a stylized book, but they're so amazing, and he'll kill a guy for just because it gets in the way of a business deal. He won't think about it emotionally, and in that way it's different than most novels in that he doesn't care if he kills someone. It's not that he's like a psychopath. He doesn't get off on it, and it just gets in the way of a business deal. So that kind of throws out the whole argument that I just made about you have to get to the cause and effect and the realness and all that, because Westlake does it beautifully, and his stories, and you're still riveted. At least I'm riveted by him. So,
do you both barrel through your draft, or will you mess around with the first chapter forever until you get it just right and then move on?
I'm a believer. I don't do anything until after I have a full draft, whether it's a short story, an essay, or a novel. And in fact, I don't even read the novel until after I'm finished with it. I never read it. And so then part of it, then I have to fix a lot of stuff that I forgot, or characters' names, or just errors. And this is a result of learning from writing short stories where I would mess around with them, and then not finish them, or mess around with them. And then the beginning was much better than the middle, which was much better than the end because I'd put more time into it. And ultimately, my thinking now, the way I approach it is that I can't begin to revise until I see what it is I've got to revise. So if I start write a third of a book and then start messing with it, I don't know what I'm doing yet because there isn't the rest of it done. But I think everybody's different, you know. I know people who do that other where they can't write the next sentence till they complete one sentence the way they want it. That would drive me nuts, you know. I would just be incredibly frustrated all the time and more irritated than usual. Or irritable, more irritable.
I guess all I can say is that, man, he and Chris and I must be related because I feel
I
exactly.
know you're my nephew. We're gonna start a wrecking yard.
Because I'm the exact same way. The only thing I'll change is if I'm about 3/4 way through something and the first there was like I made some mistakes with the character, like the main character in the earlier that I can't get over, like it's messing with my head that it's still in there. Then I'll cut that section out. But I don't read it either. My goal has always been to be a guy that finishes a bad novel and not is working on a bad novel. So when I first started, you know, I just wanted to finish it. So I barrel through my drafts and it builds my confidence up. And then I spend like I can do a draft in like less than a year, and then I'll spend a couple of years trying to save it, like save a sinking shit. It's like you buy a bad car, and then you're like, Jesus, I bought this car, it doesn't run, and then you spend 2 years and pull your hair out so you can get it to start.
Yeah, you buy a $5,000 car and put $10,000 into it.
Exactly.
Yeah,
That's exactly.
that's like the old guys used to say. There's nothing worse than spoiling a $5 drunk with a $10 meal.
Yeah,
that was. I heard that back in my youth. But
that's
yeah, I mean, I don't even barrel through a draft. I used to do that. I've tried that, and this I think I made mistakes. You know, I wasn't able to think far enough ahead. So I try to write at a very careful pace that suits my slow thinking. You know, and then at night before I go to bed, when I'm lying in bed, the last thing I try to think about is what it is I'm going to write the next day, because I know where I left off. And then with this, you know, I don't mean some like metaphysical thing, but I do believe that, you know, when I wake up and my mind is rested and, you know, maybe that's been percolating in the back of my head. That's how I write.
So what about like, we talked a little bit about structure, very tiny bit, but are you thinking plot points or beats before you even start? And Willy, you talked a little bit a while back about figuring some things out before you write the book so that you don't end up on a dead end street with it. But how much do you do? How much do you need to know?
I kind of need to know the start, the middle, and the end. Just every time I haven't done that, it starts putting pressure on me. And so I'll be about halfway through going like, I make more bad decisions when I write that way. It does, and some people say it takes the fun out of the magic out of it, but for me, it doesn't at all. Usually, like I'll start like with The Night Always Comes. I kind of knew the arc of the story, but I didn't know much else. I knew the emotional arc I wanted, and I knew the feel I wanted. So I usually start with that. Like so a lot of my novels start as songs, you know, and so I'll write like the song version of it, so like a poem version of it, and that's kind of what I start with. So I always have my anchors along the way, and I change them, but I very seldom ever change the endings from when I first started.
I mean, I never think about any of that stuff like that you mentioned. Plot points, I don't even know what that is. Beats. I've only heard those referred to in screenwriting terms, which is very strict form. And you have a lot of non-writers trying to tell you how to write. So, you know, I start out with a character and a landscape. And the thing with me is that everything is set where I grew up, on the same 4 square miles on which I'm probably the leading expert on those 4 square miles. So that makes it simplifies it. And I usually have an idea of, I don't really have the opening. I'll just start and then go back and many times cut the opening because it was just a thing to kick myself to get it started. And in the writing, I'll say, it didn't open there. It should begin much later, much earlier. And then I'll sometimes have some idea of an ending. But often by the time I get there, it didn't really work out the way I'd hoped. So I just try to sink into the imaginary world each day in that and occupy that moment and then see where it goes. And then where it goes will dictate these kinds of things you're referring to. I had a conversation with somebody recently, talked about my book and wanted to talk about the plot. And I didn't understand what she meant by the plot. And then she pointed out these things. I said, well, that was just me sitting around trying to figure out putting an obstacle in the way of the protagonist, Mick, and seeing how he would respond to that obstacle. And that way, if I get stuck or I'm not sure what to do, or if I'm midway along, it's like, well, I'll just give him a problem and see how he deals with it. And then how his solution or his response to it, if it doesn't solve it, then moves the story along further. So I think that I think every writer has to figure out the best possible way for that they work. And it's taken me a while to figure out that anything too planned is going to fail for me.
A couple of questions.
The only thing I would say is that I think it's a good idea to if for myself, if you get something, stick with it. Don't change in the middle of the story. I failed. I have a few failed manuscripts. Most recent one was going to be about a vampire novel, half vampire, blah blah blah. I worked it all out, but then halfway through, I thought, what am I doing writing vampire novels? I don't even believe in these things. Maybe he's a serial killer and he's deluding himself that he's a vampire, and that's how he rationalizes all this homicide. And then by the end of it, it's just like, well, what is this? It's a big mishmash because I had changed horses, so to speak, in the middle of this dream.
I mean, I did the same thing in a totally different way, which is I was in this little town in Oregon, and I was at this bar, and it was a typical like small town bar, meaning it was kind of a cowboy town, but the jukebox was like Judas Priest, Metallica, Merle Haggard, some disco songs. So it was all over the map, Journey. And all of a sudden this couple comes in, and the guy kind of looked like Paul Newman-ish kid, right? And the most gorgeous, like Crystal Gale kind of woman. They were probably like under 30, right? And they come in and they start slow dancing like they're in junior high, like that. And there was like Metallica went on, and then Journey, all these different, and people are partying around them, and they didn't give a shit about anybody. And I remember sitting there going, man, I want to be that cool. Why can't I be that cool? And so I was writing this novel, and all of a sudden I put that guy in the novel, and I wrote like 250 pages about him. And what I realized is like he's cool. Like to be cool means he doesn't get upset that much. He's not that beat up. He's got, and I was like, this guy's got nothing. But I spent a year and a half off seeing that guy dance with his gal. It just messed with my head because I want to be You know, I don't want anything to get under my skin, and that guy didn't care. And so, you know, I wasted a year of my life and, you know, had to chuck that 200 pages or whatever. So I make a lot of bad detours like that.
Maybe that guy was a vampire.
Hey, we can put our two manuscripts together and we'll be rich.
Well, maybe talk a few minutes about that, because I know a lot of writers who hate the idea of even ditching a short story because it's not working. And it sounds like you're both used to letting go of pages if they're not working. And I don't know, maybe say a few words about that. You know, how do you know when it's not working? Is it your response to it, or someone else read it and said it's not working?
And I think there's a difference between cutting out a section that doesn't seem to fit and abandoning a project altogether.
Right.
And in fact, this thing I'm talking about, as absurd as it sounds, I still think about going back to it and making up my damn mind about it. But how do you know when it's, I don't know.
When you abandon something, when you abandon a project, how do you, like, what drives you to that point? Is it other readers? You've had people read it?
No, for me, it's usually, I just realize it's not that good. I mean, that's all. Like I can write better than this turned out to be, and there's better books than I'm reading, and, you know, well, that's the way it goes sometimes, you know. Like I used to work, best job I ever had was as a dishwasher, you know, and all over the country. And the fact is, you know, dishwashers have good days and bad days. And I didn't worry about it, you know. The people still got their damn plates.
See, the way I look at it is, well, I wrote a novel I used to write at the local Portland, had a horse track, and no one went to it. So horse tracks are really cool because they have these big tables and they have outlets, you know, and they have a coffee shop. So you have a coffee shop, you have outlets, so you have your computer, no one's there. And then when you get tired, you can bet races to get you jacked up again. But what I did is I did a soundtrack of like ambient noise music, like 60 minutes of just like, not as, I wouldn't call it whale noises, but kind of close to that kind of stuff. And I go, man, I want to write a novel about this piece of property I almost got to buy in Reno. It was out by the river. It was a really cool piece of property, and I just didn't have the money to do it. So I said, man, I'm gonna write a whole novel where the guy gets the property. And so I put on my whale noises, and I write for 8 months where the guy gets the property. I'm about 200 pages in, and for whatever reason, I could tell in my I was waking up in the middle of the night going, man, you better look back at this thing, because it's not going anywhere. It's just you buying a piece of land and then like being really happy that you got it. And I've read some of it, and it was so bad, and I knew I can't write to music because I'm just not smart enough, and I knew that going into it, but it was so fun to just write to like ambient stuff, and I had a blast doing it, but it was the only thing I've done in the last like 15 years. It was just really like a really bad mistake. It's like, you know, like marrying a, you know, whatever, you know, it was a bad idea, and I knew it was a bad idea, but you know, I did it. But I don't care. I mean, it hurts. You cry a little bit in yourself, but no one cares except you that you just took a major wrong turn. So I don't worry about it, you know. It's just all part of the game, and it's still you're disappearing, and it's still I got to buy a piece of property that I wanted. It turned out to be a bad one.
Well, we've kept you an hour, and I so appreciate you both being here. It's been really interesting to me, and I think to everybody. If anybody has any last questions, get them in the chat really quickly. And
I have a question for Willy. What about there was a writer that I think he was from Reno, or his books were centered named Bernard Chopin. You ever hear him?
No, man, I'm gonna write it down though.
Yeah, Schopen. I mean, he only had 2 novels that I know of, and I loved them. They were really dense and dark and very weird. Okay, anyhow, sorry, Barbara.
Oh man, that's great.
What are Bernard Chopin? What are our questions? Do we have any?
Yeah, for you, Chris, how does photography interact with your writing? The choice of subject and what's the appeals to you and why? From Jennifer.
Oh, well, I always wanted to be a photographer. When I was in my 20s, that's what I did. I shot a lot of film relentlessly, obsessively. I worked in a shop to get a discount, and then I lost a job, and then I couldn't afford the processing. And a typewriter costs less than a camera. So I sort of shifted off into writing really economically. And then with the advent of digital, I was able to afford it better. And so the thing I like about visual art, and particularly photography, is that it forces you to look out at the world. You know, I spend all my time really in this little room where you see my printer, and there's a few pictures back there, but it's in my head, inside. Whereas photography means you have to actually leave the house, which I'm always reluctant to do, get in a truck, drive around, look at the world, and take a picture of it. So it's a good antidote for me. At my best, I'll write in the morning, do work outside, and then go photograph on a pretty day. That's how it works for me. I mean, that's it.
And Willy, there's a question for you. How has the experience been working with publishers in Italy and France and the UK?
I mean, anytime anyone likes what you're doing at all is pretty lucky. Yeah. You know, I've gotten this. You know, I travel a lot in Europe as a musician, but you're always standing I'm sleeping with 2 guys per room, and you play every night, and the cool thing is if you're published anywhere else, they have to put you up somewhere, and usually they're not going to put the super successful writer in a great hotel and you in a Motel 6 style, because that's just not, it doesn't feel right, I think. So they always put you in the same place. So it's the only time I've stayed in nice hotels is writing, and it only happens once in a while, but it's pretty cool. I don't know, man. All that stuff's just fun. I try not to take it any of it too seriously. But it's really fun when anybody likes what you're doing, and it's fun. You know, I didn't have a passport till I was 35, and so I was really excited just to get the passport and the dream of going somewhere. So it's been really lucky. It's a lucky run for a guy like me. Yeah.
Do you have musicians? Do you write about musicians in your fiction?
I've never really been that interested in it, but I'm working on this will be I think it was Maddie who asked if you think about your audience, and who you're writing for, and if it's going to hit the demographic. This one I did, it's about the life story of an alcoholic casino musician in Reno. So I'm sure that's going to be a smashing success out there in the literary world, but it's the one I wanted to write one novel about a musician, and that's the one I chose.
Interesting. Well, thank you so much, and I'm going to take us off Spotlight so we can also thank everybody.
Thank you, Barbara, and also I wanted to mention that it's really cool to be to be a guy who's been invited to Sisters in Crime. It's kind of an honor. I think it's cool. I like it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for being here, and thank you everybody for being with us.
Hey, Barbara, thanks a lot, and for having us back after the thing. And Chris, I've always wanted to meet you, and now I have.